New Orleans is one of the nation's most culturally diverse and unique cities. Founded by France, it was later ruled by the Spanish, then briefly reclaimed by the French, before joining the still young United States of America in 1803 with the Louisiana Purchase. But it wasn't until 1812 that Louisiana was ratified as a state of the Union, just 2 months before the War of 1812 began. The Battle of New Orleans ravaged the city in 1815, but it soon bounced back, became a major hub for trade and commerce throughout the 19th century. The city's growth continued until the early 21st century, when New Orleans was forever changed by the destruction and tragedy of Hurricane Katrina. With wars and natural disasters flooding its history, it's not hard to see why New Orleans is considered one of the most haunted destinations in the world. So join us as we venture through a few of New Orleans' haunted locations and legends in this week's Tale from the Tour, Hometown Hauntings edition. Muddled amongst the music, cuisines, and plastic beads are the dark and twisted moments of history that the city that care forgot dared not forget. And of course, the spirits make sure we remember. You would be hard-pressed to find a definite answer if you asked on the streets what the most haunted place in New Orleans is. Is it the Pharmacy Museum? Pirates Alley? Its many cemeteries dating back centuries? Or is it the seemingly abandoned residence on 1140 Royal Street, more commonly known as the Lalaurie Mansion? The infamous Madame Delphine Lalaurie purchased the now tainted manor in 1831. She lived there with her 2 daughters and her 3rd husband. Her first husband died barely 5 years into their marriage. Her second husband, barely 10. Neighbors constantly heard Delphine and her husband arguing in the mansion, and the husband ended up leaving in 1834. Some say this drove Delphine into madness, or perhaps she had always been mad. Rumors of her mistreatment of her slaves began a year prior, when a slave girl by the name of Leah fell from a balcony to her death. Delphine was investigated for the death, ending with all of her slaves set free, only for them to be bought back by Delphine, one by one. These rumors and stories would come to a head one early morning in 1834, the orange and yellow lights of a rising sun drowned out by those of the raging flames engulfing the mansion. A crowd quickly gathered around the mansion, either to help put out the fire or look upon it in awe. When the last embers were finally snuffed out, a terrible sight was revealed to the people of New Orleans. Many of Delphine's slaves were found mistreated, tortured, beaten, and chained to walls and furniture. Many believe the fire was started by a slave who was chained to the stove, perhaps to gain the attention of the outside world, so the treatment could be revealed. A fire soon raged in the crowd, and they stormed the smoldering remains of the mansion and tore it to the ground. Delphine was long gone at this point, fleeing to Paris to live out the rest of her days. In the ensuing years, the mansion was rebuilt, and strange and gruesome stories began to arise about Delphine performing horrific experiments on her slaves. As shocking and wicked as these accounts are, there's no concrete evidence that these torturous acts ever took place. Regardless, there was not an ounce of love or compassion in that mansion, only hatred and suffering, which makes it morbidly perfect for hauntings. There have been many reports of moaning coming from the room where the slaves were kept. Besides that, phantom footsteps have been heard echoing throughout the manor, and those who have stood near the house have reported feeling an overwhelming sense of dread and negativity. In the late 1800s, it became an all-girls African-American school. Many girls would come up to their teacher in tears with scratches and bruises on their arms. When asked who did this, the girls always responded with, "That woman." Afterwards, the mansion was reconfigured into apartments. In 1894, a man was found murdered in one of the suites. The room was ransacked, though nothing was taken. When the police questioned the neighbors, one of them said that the man told him that there was a demon in the mansion who wouldn't rest until the man had met his end. But was this also the work of Madame Lalaurie, or something else entirely? Whatever the case, it would seem that there is no end to the suffering at the Lalaurie Mansion. These horrors aren't the only dark and bloody stains on the Crescent City. More than 80 years after the fire of Lalaurie Mansion uncovered the monstrous Madame, a new terror made its claim on the city. But instead of the people banding together in anger, they cowered in fear, for the Axeman cometh. Between May of 1918 and October of 1919, the Axeman laid claim to 12 victims. The Axeman's methods were always the same. He would take the axe from the victim's dwelling and slip inside. Looming over the sleeping families, he would bring the axe down with a sickening, cracking thud. The majority of the victims were Italian and owned local grocery stores. As the killings and attacks grew, both the media and the populace were in a frenzy. However, instead of scattering and trampling about, they did what the Big Easy did best. They played jazz. Newspapers had published a grim and horrifying letter that claimed to be written by the Axeman himself. The Axeman's letters ridiculed and mocked the people and police. But more than that, the letter had specific instructions for the residents of New Orleans. In my infinite mercy, I'm going to make a little proposition to you people. Here it is. I'm very fond of jazz music, and I swear by all the devils in the nether regions that every person shall be spared in whose home a jazz band is in full swing. The Axeman had set a time and a date for the whole city to play, 15 minutes past midnight on the eve of St. Joseph's Day. Even today, the holiday is a major citywide event for New Orleans, especially its Italian immigrants. On bended knee, the people played. Every music hall, every club, every bar, and every household is blaring out their souls in order to save them. Any outsider could mistake this as a celebration, but it was a cry for help. It became evident that the actual Axeman did not write the letter, and no one is quite sure who did. For that matter, no one really knows who the Axeman was. He did continue his killing spree into the summer and fall of 1919, but after that he vanished into the night, never to be seen again. With all of the darkness and pain the Crescent City has had to face in its long history, it's difficult to imagine finding beauty in death. That is until you enter Jackson Square. It's hailed as one of America's greatest public places, as well as one of New Orleans' most well-known landmarks. And towering over the square stands one of the city's most distinct works of architecture, the St. Louis Cathedral. Since New Orleans' founding in 1718, the cathedral has been demolished and rebuilt 3 times. Since the inception of the cathedral, there have been over 100 people buried right beneath the floor. They were church and civic leaders that helped to shape both the faith of the city and the city itself. One such person buried beneath the cathedral is Père Antoine. He was a Spanish friar that came to New Orleans in 1774 and became pastor of the cathedral. His generosity and kindness made him popular and well regarded amongst the people of New Orleans. When he died in 1829, the entire city mourned. Since his death, the ghost of Père Antoine has been seen in St. Louis Cathedral by countless people. It's hard to mistake his spirit as anyone else but him, with his portrait on display at the cathedral. But he's not the only pastor known to wander the cathedral. Père Dagobert became pastor in 1745, and it seems he hasn't stopped preaching since. On quiet evenings after worship, people have often seen the ghost of Dagobert wandering the aisles of the cathedral, his head down to the ground, walking silently in sandals. It seems a pastor's work is never finished, even in the afterlife. Legends and stories like these are what help keep our history and ancestors alive. They are a part of a city's culture. They are its essence. They show that when it comes to hometown hauntings, the truth may be stranger than fiction.